Tonight's story is called The Vanishing Firefighters of Itaewon. It is not about the night itself, but what came after. The silence, the wounds unseen, and the heroes who slipped away. Welcome to Court of the Crane, where history meets the shadows of crime, tragedy, and justice. To be honest, this week's episode was going to be about another chapter in Joseon history. However, due to recent events, we have changed the schedule to address something significantly more recent and more pressing, a story of courage, tragedy, and the invisible wounds carried by those who step into disaster. Before we begin, a disclaimer. Today's story deals with themes of suicide, trauma, and mental health struggles. Because of this, we advise listeners to proceed mindfully or skip the episode if needed. Your well-being comes first. Tonight, we examine the story of two firefighters who responded to the Itaewon crowd crush and the devastating consequences that followed, revealing not just the tragedy itself, but the long, unseen aftermath for those who try to save others. Seoul, October 29th, 2022. The Itaewon Halloween crowd swelled far beyond what its narrow streets could hold. Itaewon has long been one of Seoul's global party districts, lined with clubs, bars, and restaurants, a crossroads of cultures and nightlife. That year, the festival carried even greater weight. It was the first Halloween after the lifting of strict COVID-19 restrictions, a chance for thousands to reclaim celebration and freedom. Tens of thousands poured into the area's winding alleys, eager for a night of fun. But as the night deepened, the celebration tipped into catastrophe. The night began with music and neon, and it ended with sirens and silence. By night's end, 159 lives were lost in the tragic crowd crush. First responders rushed in. Police, paramedics, firefighters, pulling bodies, resuscitating the collapsed, and navigating streets turned into a labyrinth of grief. But they were not alone. Ordinary people, bystanders, store clerks, friends of the fallen, also became rescuers. Civilians performed CPR with trembling hands, carried the injured to ambulances, and tried desperately to create space in the crushing crowd. Their duty was not assigned, but chosen in the moment. Their burden, like the professionals at their side, was to remember. Among them were firefighters who worked until their hands shook, their uniforms heavy with sweat, their ears filled with cries they would never forget. In those crowded alleys, moments of heroism were etched into memory, but for some, those memories would become unbearable to carry. Almost 3 years after the crowd crush, in August 2025, a firefighter who had responded to Itaewon was reported missing and later found deceased. Korean media reported he had struggled with severe trauma and depression after the disaster, and he had received counseling and treatment through his department and hospitals. Authorities have not formally attributed his death to the Itaewon response. But this was not the only case. Earlier in 2025, another firefighter who had responded that night also died, his life following a hauntingly similar pattern. Authorities have not officially linked the deaths to Itaewon, yet their colleagues and media accounts nevertheless note their participation that night and the psychological aftermath. They had entered the disaster to save people, and afterward, they themselves could not be saved. This is the vanishing, not in a crowd, but in the years after, when the echoes of screams become heavier than the silence of daily life. These tragedies reignite a hard truth, secondary trauma, when saviors themselves become fractured by the scenes they enter. Peer-reviewed studies show persistent anxiety, depression, and PTSD symptoms a year or more after the disaster, an echo of what responders often experience. Korean mental health authorities and clinicians reported substantial, ongoing distress among many survivors and responders months after Itaewon. Nationally, help seeking remains very low. Only a small share of people with significant symptoms use professional services, which increases the risk that problems persist over time. For firefighters, this toll is layered atop a career already filled with death, danger, and exhaustion. Each call adds weight, and without relief, the accumulation can become unbearable. Secondary trauma is not momentary. It is cumulative. It does not end when the last ambulance leaves. It follows responders home. It wakes them at night. It reminds them, again and again, of the faces they could not save. If trauma is cumulative, then care must be continuous. Yet Korea's systems of support have too often been built as emergency tents, erected quickly after a disaster, then dismantled once the cameras leave. The Seoul ferry sinking in 2014 revealed this pattern with painful clarity. In the first weeks, hundreds of surviving students, grieving parents, and volunteer divers were offered counseling. But these programs were short-term, underfunded, and inconsistent across regions. Families and responders later recalled feeling abandoned as public attention drifted elsewhere. Many carried their trauma for years without structured support. For some, the weight eventually became unbearable. That lesson, so costly and so raw, was still echoing when Itaewon came. In the months after the Itaewon disaster, the government moved quickly. Counseling centers were set up in Yongsan, hotlines were opened, and trauma specialists were dispatched to work with survivors and first responders. These early interventions mattered, but as research shows, initial aid is rarely enough. PTSD and depression often surface months or even years later, long after temporary resources have been withdrawn. Recognizing this, Korea has begun to build longer-lasting systems. From 2023 onward, disaster mental health governance was expanded, and responder support standardized through the National Trauma Center and local networks. Municipal mental health centers are slowly increasing capacity, though staff shortages remain severe. Pilot programs now test peer support networks, where firefighters, medics, and police officers can speak openly with trained colleagues rather than outside counselors, a model borrowed from international best practices. Yet, the gaps are still stark. Korea continues to face one of the highest suicide rates in the OECD, and stigma silences many who need help most. Public servants often fear career repercussions if they admit distress. Meanwhile, child psychiatric clinics are overwhelmed, with visits surging in recent years, some from children who witnessed Itaewon or lost friends there. Still, signs of change are emerging. The Ministry of Health has pledged to double the number of child psychiatrists by 2030. Universities are expanding trauma counseling programs as well. And in 2025, Seoul opened a pilot National Trauma Healing Center dedicated to long-term therapy for disaster survivors, their families, and frontline responders. The memory of the firefighters who vanished in silence makes one truth clear. Systems of care cannot be temporary shelters. They must endure as long as the shadows of memory last. In the quiet aftermath of disaster, attention drifts elsewhere, but for those who entered Itaewon, the echoes remain. The vanishing of 2 firefighters stands as testimony. They did not die in the crush, but in the solitude that followed. Secondary trauma does not make them weak. It makes them human, and it compels us to recognize that those who protect us must also be protected. Korea is learning, through painful repetition, that mental wounds are as real as physical ones. From Seoul to Itaewon, reforms are growing, but they will be judged by their endurance, not their announcements. Their memory can push us towards change, toward a society that refuses to let heroes fall silent, toward a culture where survival itself is honored as sacrifice, and healing is part of duty. The alleys of Itaewon are bright again with music, lights, and laughter. But for some, the echoes of that night will never fade. Their memory urges us forward, to build a society where those who rush into the fire are not left alone in its smoke. In the Court of the Crane, we do not only remember the dead, we honor the living who carry the unseen weight. And we remind each other, check in on your friends, your colleagues, your family. Ask the question, listen to the answer. And sometimes that small act is the light that keeps someone from disappearing into the dark. If you're watching this in Korea and you're struggling, you can call the Suicide Prevention Hotline at 1393 for immediate support. In the US, dial or text 988 to reach the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. If you are elsewhere, please seek your local hotlines or visit findahelpline.com for international resources. You are not alone.